Hey, welcome back. I'm going to jump right back on track so we can get down to business, revealing the underlying motivation that causes so many people to victim blame. Very quickly, order of business. This episode needs a trigger warning for intimate partner violence, several different types of abuse, and there's going to be some discussions surrounding self-harm and unaliving oneself, okay? So if those topics will be too triggering for you, it's okay to sit this episode out for now. In the last episode, we talked about victim blaming. We saw how big of a problem it is. I showed you many different examples of it. We went down through the different ways that it can look, how it sounds, maybe related to a lot of those. And in this episode, I'm gonna answer the question, why do so many people feel so compelled to victim blame? Because if you have been through trauma, if you have a lot of empathy, you're gonna be baffled by victim blaming. It's gonna seem so sinister and malicious and just ridiculous. And at first when you witness it, you might think,
well, that was just a one-off. That's probably not how a lot of people behave.
Then come to find out, it's actually unbelievably common, and you'll see it a lot more probably in online spaces. However, you'll also see it a lot more behind other people's backs because people in real life are more likely to say it when you are not around. But a lot of people do feel that way still. That's still an odd urge. That's a reaction to victims, and it's a common one, okay? But why? Because I didn't understand. I didn't know why that was happening. I couldn't figure it out. I was like,
why would anyone do that? That doesn't make any sense.
This person just told you they got hurt in these horrific ways. They're upset. Obviously their life is affected. Why is it your first inclination to question them? Bring up ways that it could be the victim's fault. Make little comments. Say things like,
why didn't you leave? Why didn't you get out faster? Why didn't you tell somebody? Why didn't you blah, 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 blah.
All of that. Instead of,
what happened to the abuser? How are they being held accountable? That's a terrible story. I'm sorry that happened to you.
More often it was,
why did you let that happen to you?
And that's just a terrible question. It's a terrible way to think. And the problem is, I can say it's terrible all day, but that doesn't answer the question of why it happens. It's happening for a reason, and I was determined to figure out what that was. So I went on a journey to figure that out. And I have found it, guys. I have found it. To explain the reasons for why people tend to react to victims, especially those that are often re-victimized, with contempt rather than compassion, it's going to be a contribution of psychological, social, and cultural influences and factors. So I'm going to break down for you the 6 most common key reasons why people are motivated to victim blame rather than to empathize. Reason number 1, the first reason that people might do this is because they've never been abused before and they misunderstand the dynamics of abuse. So a lot of people that have never been abused, they might have this viewpoint of when they get mad and they hit someone or they hurt somebody, it's because they were provoked. And they might know this so well within themselves that they have nothing else to go off of besides that that's how the world works. So they have this misconception that if someone is getting hurt and getting hit, abused, or talked down to, or treated poorly, that they must be the person provoking them, that it must be the victim's behavior. They must be asking for it. And of course, if you know anything about abuse, you know that is not correct at all. Even examining the world just for a moment, we know that people hurt people that they don't even know. And we know that abuse is a complex issue. It starts sometimes in someone's childhood. And it's all these factors that are building up to the point when they get abused. And I mean, in their adulthood, in relationships. And oftentimes people want to, this is how our brain works, we want to find the most simplistic explanation for things and we want to put it away in a box. So if you're not experiencing abuse, you're going to be searching for that simplistic summarizing of the events and why they happen. You want to get some succinct idea of like why this happened. And typically the easiest way to explain why this happened is because someone caused that to happen. Someone provoked that behavior that we just aren't familiar with, that we don't see in everyday life, that we don't think people should behave that way. So we think that someone had to have provoked them, and who would be doing that? It would be the victim. We know this is not correct because victims do not provoke their abusers. We also know that hitting someone or treating someone badly, especially in a romantic relationship, is not excused because someone else provoked someone. That's not how that works. Someone makes you mad, you can't hit them. Someone makes you mad, you can't scream at them, yell at them. I mean, that's not the way things work in the real world. You might say that you'll do that or talk a big game about doing that, and maybe you do that, but there are consequences to those actions, and ultimately, most people's morals would say that is not the way that you go around behaving every time someone upsets you. So this is a misconception. Reason number 2 is because of cognitive biases. All those biases we talked about in that one video, those are coming into play here a lot. One of the major biases that people carry about abuse specifically is because they have a just world hypothesis. Most people really like to believe that our world is a just world. You hear people talk about karma. You hear people talk about justice for people that get hurt. And it's what you'll get what you give, right? If you're just a good person, all that good that you put out into the world, the universe is going to give it back to you, or whatever you believe in. That's going to be given back to you. So if you believe this, then when you hear about abuse, your brain's going to naturally think something like,
well, what did you do? What kind of life have you lived to deserve this?
And if you've ever had a streak of bad luck, where you've just had thing after thing happen in your life that's just kind of devastating, and it's building up, I'm sure you've thought to yourself,
What did I do that caused me to have this outcome? Like, what did I do to welcome this into my life? Because I thought I'd been being a good person.
when people question themselves like that, it really reveals this just world hypothesis where people believe that everything that they put out, it's like an equation. You're putting the numbers in, then those numbers should come back out. And it's only natural that people that have not been through it and maybe don't know you and don't know your character are going to assume.
This seems like maybe something that you dredged up for yourself. You caused this to happen to yourself. Like, what did you do to deserve this?
And also, people can't wrap their minds around the idea of an abuser sometimes, because you think to yourself,
well, they shouldn't have been able to get away with that if this person wasn't a bad person. No, the universe would have protected this person.
Or whatever it is that you believe in. The problem with this, obviously, is that it's not the way the world works. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that your beliefs are not correct. I'm not saying that there's no rhyme or reason to any of that. I'm just saying that we can see in evidence, if you really look at it, that there's cases all the time, even in your own life, where that isn't how it worked. You could be Mother Teresa. You could be Gandhi. You could be the best person in the world. You could never try to hurt somebody, ever. And bad things can still happen to you. Bad things don't just happen to bad people. Bad things don't just happen because you did something wrong first. Bad things happen because people make choices, and sometimes those are bad choices. And abusers make choices to abuse people. And it's not something that the victim did to earn that. It's not because of the world is working out its karma, but because of cognitive bias about that, they automatically go into that thought process. And the other bias is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is when people tend to see things in the world that confirm their preconceptions that they already had. So you were brought up to be told,
Don't put up with someone disrespecting you. The first time someone disrespects you, leave.
don't be weak.
Someone can only treat you as bad as you allow them.
If these are already your beliefs, when a victim is in front of you describing what happened to them, you're going to be making assumptions that they are weak, that they didn't stand up for themselves, that they like the drama, all these common misconceptions. And if that's what you already believe, you're going to see that in the behavior of the victim, and then you're going to attribute that to why they've been abused. Number 3 is a lack of empathy. We don't understand things that we haven't been through, oftentimes. It's typically not the case. Your average person is not really that keen on trying to understand things that they haven't been through. You'll see people in their growth and development, they might have a really bad take on something when they're in their naive younger years. So they might really just think they know a lot and just be out there spewing garbage that just doesn't hold weight in the real world. And then you'll see that they might go through some things, go through some little bumps and cracks in the road and get hurt a little bit. And you'll see those views start to change. And you see they might have a lot more compassion about certain experiences. And so it works the same with victims of abuse. If you have not been victimized, if you have not been with an abuser, then it's going to be hard for you to wrap your head around how that could happen to somebody. People have a huge ignorance surrounding the effects of trauma. If I asked you today, and you're not someone that's been through these things that I'm about to name, if I said,
how would you feel if someone in your family was... How would you feel if armed robbers came into your house right now and started holding you at gunpoint and, things like this?
You would probably be like,
I would fight them.
or something. Or,
I would run and get the phone.
but, evidence shows that people do a lot of things. They freeze up, or they don't fight back. They are afraid. They are traumatized. You can say what you would do all day, but the thing about trauma and about really devastating experiences is that you don't truly know how that feels until it happens to you. Now, something that helps people with empathy is that if they do go through something, they go through something hard, something at least a bit traumatic early on in their life, and then they have to grow from that, they tend to develop a stronger sense of empathy and understanding, and they tend to want to relate to people a little bit better. And so when you have that desire, you have more of an open mind. You listen to people better. You put yourself in their shoes a little bit better. You go,
when this happened to me, this thing that really hurt me, I remember that feeling. I remember that crushed feeling. I remember how I couldn't really get along with my everyday activities anymore, and I felt really ashamed, and I felt this way.
and if you felt those things, then it's a lot easier to see someone who's in that same type of a pain, that reaction, and go,
Oh, okay, this is why. I remember how it felt to be like that. I'm not going to judge that person. I'm not going to assume that they're causing their own problem. I'm not going to think that there's something more behind what they're doing that they caused it for themselves. I'm going to remember what I went through, and I'm going to have compassion.
a lot of times if you don't have that skill, you haven't recognized that you're living a whole life and a whole set of experiences that every single other person is living that same dynamic life and experiences of their own, then this can be hard for some people. They are just very blind to it. They make assumptions, they jump to conclusions, and it's typically a lot more simplified than the actual intense, unbelievable effects that trauma can have, the power it can take over your life. We all have the same sets of emotions that we can draw from. So once you can relate, it makes it a lot easier. People have a really hard time relating to the psychological scars that abuse leaves behind. It's intense because a lot of people, if you think of abuse, you think of like the picture of somebody like with black eyes and bruises or in the hospital, like because they got so severely abused. And it's like it takes that for people to go,
oh, that's terrible. Oh my goodness, that's just, wow.
and they think that's a huge deal. But the thing victims of abuse really across the board will tell you is that those body traumas, those have a healing timeline. You lose that bruise, it goes away. If you broke your leg heals and you can walk on it again, that goes away. That has a timeline and it's done. But the trauma that exists inside is far more diabolical, more insidious, longer lasting, creeps up on you, and comes out in ways that you never expected. And those are the things that keep people trapped long term. And so when you see somebody that's deep in a depression and they're not doing the things that you're expecting of them, maybe you have a roommate that's not cleaning up after themselves, they're laying in bed all day, they seem like they just want to play their video games or be on their phone, they're not talking a lot, they don't get up, they don't take a shower and go face the day. I have an employee that's not showing up for work, they seem to be really struggling with that. It's natural if you don't understand trauma that you might automatically assume that they're a lazy person, that they have some type of personal flaws that are causing them to act that way. You might heavily judge them. But if you had ever been traumatized by something, you realize those are the exact effects that it has. It's the psychological damage that it does that people fail to recognize, and that leads to a lot of victim blaming. It's also the whole issue entirely that there's an empathy deficit. A lot of people just really struggle to be empathetic to others. We're a self-focused type of being, and unless you've kind of picked up on it or you have it naturally, sometimes it's hard for people to empathize. Number 4 is social and cultural influences. Sometimes in certain cultures, you'll notice that there's a stigma around victims of abuse, domestic violence especially, and especially in abuse. So something that we've seen in recent times kind of coming up a lot in the media is people kind of pushing back on the idea of don't question the victim, and that there's been victims that are telling a lie, and there's this fear amongst oftentimes men of getting accused of assault and rape by someone that they did not do that to. And have there been cases that this has happened? Absolutely. Absolutely there have. But a very sad outcome of that happening was that it didn't just harm the people that were falsely accused, it also harmed people that do actually get abused in that way, because then they were more heavily disbelieved, more commonly questioned. It's like they had to do this more of an uphill battle, even more than they had before, of proving that this bad thing happened to them, because it's devastating to be abused, to go through something like that, but it's also very devastating to be accused of doing that when you didn't. There's just no other way around that. So it naturally caused a stigma at times around abuse victims, and that they might be lying. So that's tough to get over. And a lot of times people will really question that when you come out with those allegations. It can be tough. There's also In some cultures, there's a normalization of abuse. In certain places, there's just an idea that you stay in line or you're going to get it. In the United States, I think there's been a big shift about parenting over the past several decades. Now, if you were someone born in the 90s or prior, you probably remember this. That would be like the minimum, I think, born before 2000, where you'd still most likely have experienced this as a norm in your household. Parents discipline their kids by spanking them. Like, that was just common. That was just what you did. But there's been so much studied in the way of psychology and behavioral development in all this time since then, and so many studies on the traumas of having violence committed against you. So it's just that overwhelming amounts of studies. Many psychologists and neuroscientists and biologists and anyone in that field would comfortably say that not only does hitting your child as a method of discipline not correct the behavior the most effective way. I mean, there's always a chance you get lucky. You frighten them into submission. You intimidate them into submission. Okay, there's those people that might work on, and maybe they don't have too many side effects. But that's not what evidence shows most of the time. It very overwhelmingly shows that it causes a distance. It causes a breakage of the bond between parent and child. It doesn't teach lessons. In your adult years, you learn that when you're controlled by fear, that's just something that you have to break out of, because that's just fear by intimidation. That's a negative way of influencing behavior. And anything like that is bound to lead down a negative path eventually. In the real world, when you grow up, it doesn't teach you actionable methods of handling something that has been done wrong to you. Like, you told a lie, and instead of your parents teaching you the consequences of when you lie when you're older, which if you lie when you're older, you might lose a job. You might lose things that you want. You might lose out on income. You might lose a friend. Instead of showing them what that would feel like, we just spank them. What does that teach you? It teaches me I'm terrified of my parent, so I'm not going to lie to them. But I still don't understand quite why it's not okay for me to lie. So in other contexts, I might lie still because I don't know the real world consequences of that. And then when I grow up, I might think,
well, when someone lies to me, I can just hit them. That's what they deserve. I can just hit them anytime they lie to me.
You can't go around hitting people. That's not how it works in the real world. And there's people, it's just like, it blows my mind, because there's people that are like,
you can get trained in the streets. Now, if you didn't get your A beat when you're a child, then that's what's wrong with children today. And
all this stuff.
yeah, in the real world, someone will beat your A.
And it's like, yeah, and then they'll go to jail. Like, that's not what we're promoting out here. So it's just, it doesn't make any sense. It's not about necessarily me thinking that spanking is equated to abuse. It's just physical violence. It is assault. I mean, it is. You're assaulting. Why would you draw a line between you're hitting somebody else? Only okay when it's your own child. When you're hitting, you're applying force to them physically. Why is that okay when it's your child? It just doesn't make any sense. It's just literally logic. It's not like it traumatized me or anything, but I mean, it didn't feel right. And obviously some people are going to be like,
oh, it's not supposed to feel right. It's supposed to hurt.
Trust me, I get it, okay? It doesn't have the outcome you would think it would have. Now, this is just my personal anecdote in my family. I remember getting spanked one time. I was 8 years old. I remember it very well. And I remember thinking,
this is really humiliating, and I hate this, and weird.
It was a weird experience. But I was like,
what are we doing here? I have to bend over?
You know, that's just so weird. And thank God, I didn't really get in trouble a lot. My brothers, on the other hand, I don't know how they're managing to sit down these days. All those spankings they got. No, they definitely got a lot more than me, though. My particular brother, who was spanked the most, for sure. And I know he was spanked the most because I have 2 older brothers, and they have a different mom biologically than I do, because my dad had a previous marriage before he met my mom. Their mom was, she had a rough past, and a lot of times in their youth, she was still battling with that. And he tended to cling more to his mom, oftentimes when they would have a kind of a choice. My oldest brother would more come with our family more often. And then my other brother, the younger one, he felt some type of a duty to protect his mother. And he always wanted to stay with her so she wouldn't be alone. But she often had boyfriends. Talk about the cycle of abuse. She had numerous boyfriends that were abusive to her. My dad and their mom. They were a young couple. It didn't work out. It was very toxic, and they divorced and separated apart when my two brothers were very young, like 3 and 4 maybe, something like that. And it was really tumultuous for them. And my oldest brother, he kind of took on, I guess, the more stoic approach and like, I'm going to get past this and I'm going to be above this. And my brother right under him became more of the black sheep, the rebellious one, the one acting out. He acted out from when he was a young child. They were totally different temperaments. Okay, my oldest brother just always did what he was supposed to do, always excelling in school, lots of friends, sticking with the right crowd, following the rules for the most part. And then this brother, constantly challenging authority, getting into things, causing mischief, acting out. And it's so evident why he was doing that. His home life was in shambles, literally, and his family was ripped apart. And he was coping with that at 4 years old. And he would act up as a result of that. And it's so sad that in those times, and you can call me a softie and say I'm just, oh, but modern day, this is emotional. Modern day, that brother is so riddled with mental illness. I don't know him anymore. He has a really bad case of schizophrenia. He won't let anyone help him. And he is a homeless person on the streets because he won't allow his family to help him. He thinks that we are part of the plot to get him. Schizophrenic people have delusions and a psychosis. They think people are out to get them and implant them with things and are listening in on them, and they hear voices, they see things that aren't there. And as the illness progresses, it, without treatment early on, it goes past a point of nearly, no return. And because they don't believe that they have anything wrong with them, because they think that you telling them that that's happening is just part of the plot to get them and to institutionalize them, lock them up, and do whatever it is that they think that the world is plotting against them to do to them. This is very real for them. And without medication, it's nearly a hopeless illness. And I haven't had him in my life for the past few years. We grew up together. We used to be very close. He was my brother. He is my brother, but I don't know him anymore. I saw how one brother who is very successful and has a wife and children and has this amazing career, this multi-million-dollar home, excelling. And this brother who has developed schizophrenia and multiple other mental illnesses threw away his life with his wife and his home because he was deteriorating and suffering and fell into substances and is homeless and doesn't recognize some of us anymore when we see him. That's quite a difference. And when he was little, he got a lot of spankings. So this is how this ties in. I'm sorry, I'm not just going on a tangent. So this is how it can be a normalization of abuse. I'm not trying to say that if you swat your kid's hand, or I'm not trying to get into your parenting, okay? If you're beating on your kid, you should absolutely stop. That is abuse, okay? But it was a fine line back in the day. And many people have a memory of being beat as discipline, okay? So it's not that far off. This is how normalized it was. They went to church. Well, I wasn't born yet, but my parents used to go to church every Sunday. And the pastor or the leader, the youth leader, whatever he was, spanked my brother because he was crying. He wouldn't stop crying. He wanted his mother, and the service was going on, and he would not stop crying and calm down, so he got a spanking. And this grown man at church who spanked my brother left marks on his backside. And he was 4 years old. And my dad and my mom, they were not okay with this. They absolutely challenged the church. They were very upset. And there was nothing they could do besides stop going there. And to be fair, I'm not sure if they stopped going there. It was so accepted back in that time that it was,
Well, spare the rod, spoil the child.
and they're at the church, so they're going to stand by it. That was very warranted, and that's what he needed. I'm using that as an example. That has changed a lot in our society. I don't think most people use physical discipline on their children nowadays. I do still hear it. I'm not judging. I'm just here to tell you my opinion, and from what I've known from studies, that not only is it not the best way to correct the behavior of your children or to teach them how to be the proper adults that you want them to be, it also can be damaging to certain types of people. Everyone has a little personality in there. It's nature and nurture, okay? And certain people hating your kids is not going to teach them. It's going to have negative effects on them, okay? So it's something that I think as more of a society, we've moved the majority over to discouraging that and teaching people that there's more effective ways to correct behavior in children that actually works and fosters positivity and better, more well-rounded members of society in the future. There's some places that still have normalization surrounding abuse. And so in those places, victims are going to be blamed more often. It's going to be a norm. It's going to be like,
Mom, that's how it goes. That's how we do things here.
in other countries, it's perfectly acceptable that a man would abuse his wife or hit his wife if she got out of line. That's still something that happens these days in certain countries. Very accepted. Right, the fifth key reason that victim blaming happens is because of projection and defense mechanisms. This is one that I kind of clocked. I started to catch on based on what I was observing on Reddit and the people that I was interacting with that were victim blaming. So this one I think is a strong key component. Okay, and this kind of blew my mind. If you understand projection, it's projection of your own personal insecurities, or it can be projection of emotions that are happening within you, but because you are not in tune with your emotional side, you're not someone who has really fostered the growth of understanding your emotions. You were taught more to kind of ignore those. That's what you've done all your life. If you have an avoidant attachment, so if you're a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant that leans more avoidant, then you might not notice as much when you are projecting, because when you have negative feelings, you're usually going to think that they are being put upon you by whoever's external. That's why people, when they're cheating, they're going to accuse that person of cheating. And that's because they're projecting, because they're feeling the jealousy of wondering if that person thinks like them. They're seeing behaviors that maybe they are engaging in, and they're like,
Well, I'm cheating, so they're cheating. They're probably cheating too.
like narcissistic personalities, oftentimes they'll just pick at you out of nowhere. They'll just slight you. They'll just say something cruel, like a jab at you for no reason. You're just like, well,
Are you okay? Like, we weren't even arguing. Where did that come from? Like, what is your problem?
and it's because they felt a negative emotion from you that you may not have even been giving out to them. You may have just been saying something and they took it totally wrong, because they read slights into everything, because they are often throwing out slights at people. They are often bothered by people. They are often having an underlying meaning to the things that they're saying and being cruel in an underlying way, trying to jab at you and slight you. So they often think you're doing that. They're mistaking the fact that they feel insecure and they feel worried that you're slighting them. They're projecting that feeling to be coming from you because you did slight them. They're mixing that up. And people do this with all types of emotions. You do not have to be a narcissist to project. People project all the time. And sometimes when you're in maybe a lower time of your life, you might do it more and you might not realize you're doing it. And then you realize once you've sorted out your emotions and you understand what your emotions were during that time, you're like,
I was totally projecting that on that person. They did not deserve that.
if you often feel like a burden, you feel like you're not good enough, you feel like people don't want you around, you're going to read into people's body language and their words incorrectly. You're going to assume that those feelings that you're having internally, because you have those internal beliefs, you know how I say your beliefs make your reality? You're going to think that's the reality. You're going to think people are doing that to you. You're going to think people are just like, ugh. You're going to think when someone sighs that it's because they don't want to be around you. That's projecting. They're not feeling that. You're just reading into it because you're feeling that. That's how that works. Individuals may project their own fears, insecurities, past experiences, things like that onto other people. And so when someone is doing this in the case of victim blaming, oftentimes it's people, just one example of people that frequently victim blame, it's people that were taught when they were young that emotions are very weak, showing your emotions and letting people take away your independence, not standing up for yourself, not being strong, standing your ground, not letting somebody hurt you, is something that they can control. because the way that person always coped with negative emotions was to push them away, act like they didn't have them, and have to stoically get through all of that and never show an emotion, never deal with it. Just push it away, push it deep down, overcome it, be very independent, not need anybody for anything. So they may be just a strong, independent person that never experienced that type of abuse. And so when they see victims that are showing signs of weakness, they think, and showing signs of vulnerability, they hate it. Vulnerability is the shadow of someone who has an avoidant personality. So if growing up you were shamed for your emotions, if you were told that was weakness, if you were neglected when you showed emotion or ridiculed, put on blast, told you were a baby,
Suck it up.
Boys don't cry.
Stop being so dramatic.
you got more attention and praise for your achievements, and you got nothing when you showed emotion. You got embarrassed. You were wrong. You were weak. It was bad. It was a sign of being bad and lame. And so you carried that with you, and you realized that you could not tap into those things because it was unsafe, and you learned that vulnerability is something that you don't like in yourself. You learn to push away your vulnerability and fight it and not want to ever have anything that pulls that out of you. So when you're that type of a person and you encounter a victim of abuse, they are in a state of a lot of vulnerability. They are living in vulnerability sometimes. And that is that type of a person's shadow. Your shadow is something that you see in another person that is a trait that you are kind of agitated about, and it triggers you because you don't like it. You don't like that person acting that way because it's triggering that part in you that worries that was once in you and that you've been taught to push away. So you're like,
I don't like people like that.
and then it compels people to pick at that person and point out why they're wrong and judge them. Because people who are heavily judgmental on a certain type of person, it's usually because that person is exhibiting a lot of their shadow traits. So it's oftentimes because it's a part of you that you don't like and that you don't want to believe is a part of you. And when other people are going around displaying it, it's a threat and you do not like it. So you attack it back. And you need to sort out all the reasons why that's that way with that person and not with you. It's an individual, personal flaw. It's not because of the world, it wasn't just some coincidence that this happened. It's because that person is flawed. And this is the problem with them. And that helps that person feel secure again and safe. And now this can happen on the totally other side of the spectrum too, though. Because people who are very vulnerable and don't want to be that way can also have this as their shadow. They might not be as successful at hiding it, but people who do often feel very vulnerable, very victimized, and don't like the way that makes them feel, they can do the same thing. They can see another person acting like that and feel threatened and want to attach a reason to it why that's that person's individual issue because they are like that. They are a victim. And that's why that's happening to them and it wouldn't happen to me. And that's how projection and defense mechanisms come up with this. It's I think, one of the high operating factors of why this happens. When I kind of picked up on that one, it really cracked it open for me. I was like, the shadow. It's the shadow. So when this discomfort arises, the defense mechanism that comes up is to combat that with an attack or an explanation or judgment instead of showing compassion. Because when you're sitting in discomfort or you're feeling discomfort, it's hard to be compassionate. You're more so going to react defensively. And that's what victim blaming is. It's a defensive response to a victim. Because it's always, it baffles me when I go, because my inclination is this poor person. I want to offer words of support. I want them to know that it wasn't their fault. I'm going to say something very helpful and give them support and bring them up. They're so low already. Why? Why would you get on there and be rude to them? Don't you see they've been through enough? It would just boil my blood, But so many times it happened, I was like,
There is something to this. There's a reason this is happening.
and that made so much sense. It's because they feel threatened. They feel defensive. You're not just going to go and attack someone who's already vulnerable and say rude things to them and be so filled with anger towards that person. It feels personal sometimes. The things that they say to people, the things that I hear people say or read that people are saying to victims of abuse, sometimes I'm just like,
Are you all right, ma'am? Sir, why?
it's defensiveness. It's an unreasonable level getting defensive and trying to protect themselves and separate themselves from that victim. The sixth key reason that people victim blame is because of perceived moral judgment. There's a couple parts to this. So, first of all, it comes from a moralistic attitude. Some people a little too high on their high horse, and it causes them to look down upon people unfairly. Some people hold a very strict moral, ethical standard, and that's fine. But sometimes when it's a little too much, they aren't realizing that there's an ego that comes along with that, and it causes them to start to judge people when they're thinking, this happens a lot in religion. I'm just going to say it. I'm sorry. But it does. It happens. I know it's not everyone, but it happens often in people that are highly religious. Whatever your belief, I'm not pushing any beliefs or discouraging any beliefs. I'm saying in the Bible, if you believe in that, it says thou shalt not judge. Only God can judge. Things like that. But sometimes people, when they just get a little too religious, they suddenly want to judge everyone. They think they've been given the God-given right to judge everyone who doesn't follow it to a T the way they do. And so this can happen with victims, especially victims who fall into a category of being the type of person that they would think probably is getting their just desserts, is living a life that is not ethical or wasn't moral enough. And that's why they've gotten this fate. And so that could be a reason behind it. Additionally, assumption of control is another perceived moral judgment. We tend to think that people should be in control of what happens to them. This is a lot like the earlier one, that you can have a control. If you do the right things, you can control what happens to you. You know, you make these choices, that's not going to happen. But as we've talked about before, it's not some karmic thing like all the time. That might be true, but there's more at play here. So just because you don't ever do anything wrong doesn't mean nothing wrong will ever happen to you, because other people are in the world and other people have free will, and they could be doing something wrong that affects you. There's so many different domino effects. And so it's the same thing with your choices and your morals and things like that. And there'll be this false assumption that the victim has complete control over their situation. So if they're here complaining about this abuse that they're suffering, you know, they're speaking out about it and they need some help, there's this assumption that,
Okay, are you dumb? You have control over your own life. If you don't want to be abused, then leave them. You can control your situation. Just fix it. Like, get away from it. Just walk away, and it's done. You don't have to talk to that person anymore. You can have control here.
that's an assumption that is made. It's like people who've never been in that situation, they vastly underestimate the psychological impacts of abuse, how it rewires your brain. The victim-abuser relationship, it can't be summarized in a few words. The dynamics of it are so much deeper than that. There's novels written about this. There's scientific journals written about this. It's a dynamic connection. It can't just be simplified into,
Just get away from it.
it's not like that. They don't have complete control. They absolutely don't. They are being controlled by someone most of the time. This is the one where I've seen friends of abuse victims turn on them and take it personal when the victim goes back to the abuser after they said they were going to get away. In fact, there was a story that I read not too long ago where it showed the text messages between these two friends, and one of the friends was in an abusive relationship and the other was upset at this friend, and she was just going in on her. And it was very clear by the first page that this friend felt personally betrayed and very offended and was just taking it to the heart that this victim, her friend, was returning to that relationship. And on one hand, if expressed in a way that demonstrates, I'm angry right now because I'm angry for you, because I know you're going to get hurt, and I'm angry that this is happening to you, and I wish I could help influence you because like you could stop doing this, and I'm just so mad that you're going right back into the lion's den, and I'm angry about that for you. That's one thing. And that would have been really understandable and really normal and really human. A lot of victims, you will start to see that it's not just their partner relationship where they have this dynamic. You'll see that a lot of the friendships they have, they aren't treated very well either. And this friend who seemingly was an ally and was her friend, her support system, who was supposed to be, you know, loving her and on her side and encouraging her, she had a reason to feel upset that her friend said she wouldn't go back to the abuser, and then it was found out that she had started spending time with him again. And this friend was very upset. And the thing is that this friend wasn't talking about how worried she was for her. All this friend could talk about was how much of a liar she was, how she's a bad person, she's just as bad as her abuser, and that she lies because she doesn't really love her family and friends. She was like,
You don't really love your family and friends, because if you did, you wouldn't be talking to this abuser again. You've been lying to me. You've been hiding this behind my back. I knew I shouldn't have trusted you. You cried to me, and I believed you. And look what you're doing now. You're just as bad as him. You guys must be meant for each other.
just tearing her apart for falling into a cycle that so many people get sucked back into. He was coming to her, apologizing and begging and crying and pulling her back in. And then she has this friend holding her strictly accountable to the fact that she told her she wasn't going to go back. But like, hello, she's in a cycle of abuse. It's like a drug. It's really powerful. And all that this friend could think about was talking about herself, and she was just going in on her. She was saying things like,
You lie to me because you don't want to hear the truth. You know I'll tell you the truth, and you might not like to hear it all the time, but I'll still give it to you, and that's all I know how to do is I know how to tell the truth, and people don't want to hear the truth.
and stuff like that. And it's just like, pause. Hold on, sweetheart. Actually, people don't like to hear someone being an a-hole and giving their opinion and their wild assumptions that are based on something that they know nothing about fully, being very judgmental. And they want to call that truth when it's really just them being a big a-hole and having no compassion. Truth, you can give truth, you can be blunt all day. But if you're not balancing that out with tact and consideration for other people's feelings and putting yourself in that person's shoes first, you're just blabbering your false opinions as facts all over the place. You're not some amazing pillar of truth, okay? You're just a jerk. And no one asked for your truth, which is really just your opinion. That is not logical, full of bias. So that happened. And leading back to this whole assumption of control over the situation, that's what this friend was having. And that friend was pretty abusive herself, honestly. The way she ripped, for 4 screenshots, she ripped this person apart. Like, talk about, it's in multiple areas of the victim's life. My goodness. And then a lot of people that were commenting on it were literally co-signing the whole thing. They were saying,
Well, she's right. Sorry, she's right.
I know, I commented on it. And I was like,
She's right that you probably should leave this person. But the thing is that you know that already. You would love to leave this person for good. You already know that. And this person, I'm going to tell you right now, is not your friend. This woman talking to you for 4 screenshots, berating you and shaming you and tearing you down and telling you you're all these things and passing nasty judgment on you because you tried really hard to overcome a very freaking tough thing and you are falling back into it right now. And sometimes that happens, and that a true friend is just supposed to support you through the decisions that you make until you're strong enough to make the right one and understand and have compassion that you don't have full control over it and that you currently have psychological and mental, emotional factors that are weighing on you that make your physical choices of proximity not the only factor. And they're strong, stronger than anything physical, okay? This is not your friend because she has no interest in understanding you. She's thinking all about herself and how you have wronged her. Her, it's all about her. This is not your friend, and this person is borderline abusive as well.
that's what I told her. And here's the thing about friends like that. This is an abuser's dream. This is an abuser's dream. At the end of that passage, the friend said,
Now all you have is him. Now he's all you have. So go be with him.
accurate. And how tragic of you to leave her in that situation like that. All she has is him. And guess what he's telling her too? Guess what he's been telling her for a long time, actually.
No one's gonna put up with you. You don't have anyone but me. I'm the only one who will put up with your crap. I'm the only one who could ever love you. Your friends don't care about you. Go tell them. Go tell them. I'm so scared. Go tell them. See how they react.
That's what he's been saying. And guess what? Now, this is what her friend does to her. She confirms that. She says that thing. The same thing the abuser was saying. It is an abusive partner's ideal situation when society, friends, and family look down on the victim and blame and judge them harshly. It is an abuser's dream. What a score for them. They did all this. They caused all this trauma. They ruined this person's life nearly. They did. It was all their actions. They did it. And the gift that society and this person's friends and family are giving to that abuser is freedom from all persecution, freedom from all blame. But instead, they are aiding in blaming the abuser's victim. Great. Do you know how delighted that makes an abuser? It must be like a rush of like no other. What an ideal situation for them. Because she is going to go back to that person and she's going to believe that that's all she has. And she might not get away again, knowing that there's no support for her anymore. It's very dangerous. It's situations like that lead to sometimes death, the end of someone's life. It's not a small thing to do to somebody. Isolation plays a major role in why abuse is so difficult to leave. Major role. And isolation is a form of coercive control. The worst form of emotional abuse there is. And it's because it creates a wedge between the victim and any support system that they might have. And abuse, being a victim of abuse, naturally does that sometimes because of the assumption of control. It's only natural that victim's going to begin to feel they have nowhere to turn, they're alone, and that they must deserve the treatment that they're getting from the abuser because they're a burden. They're dumb. They're unworthy. No one likes them. No one loves them. These are phrases that oftentimes we see in those cases where a teenager or a preteen ends up taking their own life because they've been severely bullied online or at school with these very same ideas and phrases.
No one loves you.
No one likes you.
You know what a common thing for an abuser to say to their victims? I've seen it so many times. They say,
You should just yourself.
it's so common. It's disgusting. And they often take it much further. Just cruel. Saying things like,
I want to watch you do it right in front of me. I hope you.
it's just trust me, it gets bad. I'm not going to repeat right now, but it's horrific. And those are the types of things that when a teenager is getting bullied online or at school and they say those things and then the teenager does that, guess who they have prosecuted and held accountable for that? Their bully. So if that is fathomable, and you know that that's how victims of abuse are often treated, I mean, you can't very well blame a victim for their abuse, yet turn around and blame the abuser only once the victim dies. If the abuse is what led to their death, why does it make any sense to blame the victim for being abused when people can very well understand the tragedy when someone loses their life because of how they were treated so bad, to be made to feel so low about themselves that they thought the only way out was to pass away? I mean, come on. And like, not even getting that far yet. Let's not pretend that we don't know that abusers don't just wake up one day and start abusing someone heavily, just right out the gates. They don't just like wake up and start mopping the floor with the victim, insulting them to high heaven when the rest of the days before that they were just perfect, and then just no. They ease them into it so slowly over time, so gradually. They just do a little bit. They test the waters. And there's something I saw very recently that is really similar to this. It is. I mean, it's breadcrumbing, but they're calling it something new. They called it the 5% trick or something like that. And it's where this influencer was describing this manipulation tactic where you start out giving 100%. This person gets used to that. Now, if you drop down suddenly to 70% effort, they're going to notice that. They're going to be like,
What the hell?
they're not going to put up with that. They're going to be upset. But he describes if you drop down just 95 and then you see if they notice. And maybe they notice a little bit, but not enough to say something. Not enough to make a fuss about it. I mean,
I'm not some entitled brat. Like, it's fine. Like, I don't need all that anyway.
and then they get acclimated to that. And then, what do you think he does? Another 5% down, right? Just very small increments. And then they see how the person reacts to that. And it's not until you get down to like really low with that gradual decrease that you start to go,
What has happened here? What's going on?
and then get upset. And then when you've slowly immersed them down to that and they didn't even notice it was happening that whole time, and then they're devastated because they're like,
You're not putting in any effort.
and then they kind of act like they don't care about that, and they kind of treat them badly for a while, get them really desperate and upset and really missing that old person that they didn't even see go away. They're so confused, they're so lost, they wish like anything that person would just turn around and start giving that effort. If you've ever had somebody pull away when you were still in love with them, when you were still engaged with them, and they pulled back, you know how that feels. You know, like the only thing in the world that would make that better, that would just be the dream come true, is if they just would get back to the way they were.
Just stop doing this. Just turn back around. Just start being the person that you were before. That's all I want. I just want your effort. I want your attention back. I want it back.
And you want it so bad. And so he explains that in that moment, you give it back, but you don't give it back to 100. you only give it back to about 60, 70. And then they're so grateful for that. They're so elated that you're not giving them 40 that 60 becomes the new 100. And they're okay with that and they accept that because they're like over the moon. And that is how he described how you can put less effort into your relationship. That's how you can achieve that. That's abuse, okay? That is manipulation 101. I was floored. This person was very seriously teaching this method. I did want to provide some consolation for people who often get told,
"You're blowing this out of proportion. This is not as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. This is very dramatic. No one's really like meticulously planning out this manipulation or whatever."
I would agree that most people are not meticulously scheming like an evil villain or something, but subconsciously, pretty much, they are typically pretty aware that they are using a tactic like this, and they are pretty aware of the outcome that it produces. If you're dealing with an adult, they're aware. They may have themselves convinced that they're doing it for a justified reason, but I assure you there are many people that know exactly what they're doing and exactly the outcome it has, and they are very much seeking that outcome. They are very much doing it on purpose. And I wanted to show some clips of that. There's this one person who talks a lot about this topic, and he's just so vile. I just can't show him. I just can't. I just don't want him on my channel. I don't want to show him. He makes me so, I can't stand him. So I don't even want to say his name because I just don't want to put him, I don't even want to bother putting him on blast like that. He's already gotten attacked by many people, so I'm just going to stay out of that. He does provide a very perfect example of this, but I was able, sadly, to find many more. So I'm going to show this one. I think this is pretty mild, if that says anything. But take a look.
I'm about to tell you how to make her very obsessed. This is very toxic, man. This is some dark matter stuff, but do not do this to everybody. Don't do this to them eaters, bro. This is high levels of manipulation, so be very careful what you do with this. Number one, you need to treat her just like her father. I've said this before, but let's go into depth. Open up every door for her. Don't ever let her pick up a bill. And you need to be someone that she can rely on. That's going to be a key factor in what happens next. Her best friend, the one that she can talk to with everything, you need to replace that. You need to be that type of beacon that she can just rely on. She's going to vent to you about everything because no one understands her like you. Second thing I want you to do after this is leave. Leave everything. No reason, just dip. So when she goes to open up that door again, she'll think about you. She got to pay for her own meals again? Oh my God. And she actually has to use her credit? Oh my God. Then when she actually breaks down and goes to vent, her best friend's not going to do the job no more. She's going to come to you. I know we're not talking anymore, but can we please talk about this? I'm working. I'm telling you, bro, this is just so toxic, man. Man, I hate to explain this. Number 3, the last and final thing, you never compliment her. You never compliment her face or her body. No. She ever were to say, do I look good? It's cool. I like that color, though. I like those earrings. I'm talking about all these tangible things. Oh, my gosh.
And if you think there's not more where that came from, there's so many more. But I don't want to give much time to that. The point is, the assumption of control is just what it sounds like, an assumption. Because when someone treats you like this, it has the effect on you that it's meant to have. Abusive people are using very manipulative tactics that psychologically damage you, that tend to get you in all out of sorts with your emotions and physically rewire your brain, change your brain chemistry, make you feel dependent on that person. And people like this guy, it's just funny. They don't realize like how, I'm going to be kind of mean for a minute, because I think very warranted for putting out a video such as this one. They don't realize how dumb it makes them sound. Like, you're just so, hello, what is their end goal? What is the point? Do you think you're going to ever have a real relationship with someone that you do that to? Or it's just to F with people? Do you ever intend on having a quality relationship with someone? Like, what does this gain you? And for how long can you sustain that? Do you want to go the rest of your life being alone and just hopping from person to person forever? Because I'll tell you what, that type of a tactic is going to make someone crazy for you. It's going to encourage an intensity of emotion that I can tell you firsthand will make you feel like a psychopath, okay? You'll be like,
Why am I doing this? Why am I so obsessed?
but eventually they'll realize what you have done to them. And you're effing with someone's emotions. So you made them think that you were someone that could be trusted, that was the closest to them. It reminded them of their own father, that took the place of a best friend. Some people wait all their lives to find something like that, you know? And when you rip somebody down from cloud nine like that, and someone that they put so much belief into, just rip that away from them. And they have to watch someone they love so much, or they thought they loved so much, treat them like garbage and like an afterthought and like they don't matter. The pain that inflicts, there's no going back, okay? You can't erase that pain, ever. You can never make up for that. You're traumatizing people. Things don't tend to work out with someone that you've traumatized severely, you know? So you might want to just think about that. And now, I will give him his credit. He did say,
don't use this on everybody. Don't use this on everybody.
Just the people who you've decided aren't worthy enough and you can just mess around with their lives like it's nothing. Just those people, right? So people who are victim blaming just don't quite grasp the level of depravity that it takes to think it's okay to treat people like this. And they don't quite understand the effects that it has and the devastation that it causes. And just everything about it is just bad and sad. And it's not something they need to be blamed for. It's a tragedy that is done to them. And they do not have control over the situation. And once they do, once they get that power back, which they eventually do usually, how about we just refrain from asking them why they didn't do it faster? How about that? How about just,
wow, you're amazing, you got out. That must have been terribly hard. You're such a boss.
You're such a survivor. You're very impressive. You're inspirational. I'm sorry for what you had to endure all that time at the hands of that person. Oh, well, you must have liked it. You stayed in so long.
shut the up. Shut up. Shut up. So, obviously, this is a big problem. And what can we do to better support victims? I know a lot of people get really worried when it comes to victim blaming. A lot of people will say,
Why is it wrong to hold people accountable?
Objectively, victims often are making really bad decisions, and they're staying with people that are very dangerous for them. How do we just ignore that?
I get that. And so, how can we better support victims and be proponents for people to not be doormats and not just turn a blind eye and enable it, but also avoid victim blaming? I'd say for most people that are victim blaming, you probably are very uncomfortable with victims. You dislike that vulnerability, you dislike that weakness that it puts out there, and you dislike people, you can even call it like pulling the victim card or playing the victim card. You just dislike it. You feel more inspired and more drawn to people who take accountability and stand up in the face of adversity and all of that, aside from what you may be overlooking there. For the most part, you're uncomfortable with victims, okay? Or there's the victim blamers that maybe they're not uncomfortable with victims, but they just don't like them. They don't like those people. They don't want to deal with victims, and they don't want to deal with the problem of abuse. They don't want anything to do with it. So I would say that both of those types of victim blamers would prefer that there be less victims that they have to interact with or that exist. They would like to end this problem, even if for selfish reasons, meaning that they don't have to encounter victims, okay? And then there's like one more group that is just like sadistic, weird people who just like get a kick out of being superior and talking down to people, and they know victims are an easy target. And to be honest, like, them, I don't care. Big F you to them. I really don't give a what they want. So, speaking to the people that are just uncomfortable with victims, I would say that people who align with victims and people who are victims and people who advocate for victims share a goal with you then, because they would like to see the number of victims go down as well. So I think we're all in alignment there. So if I let people know, and if you, as a victim, spread the word to people who do this, the victim blaming doesn't help with that. Victim blaming very clearly shows a correlation to causing re-victimization, causing abuse to continue, causing the actual people who cause abuse, the abusers, to get off scot-free and to take no accountability, because all the while everyone's blaming the victim, and it causes just more victimization. So I think that's an amazing reason to stop doing it. Amazing motivation to stop doing it, because the goal that you have in doing it, it's not working. It's not going to make less victims happen, and it's not going to cause less abuse. So there you go. Here are 9 quick things that you can do in your everyday life to reduce the number of victims and the amount of abuse instead of victim blaming and taking your anger out on victims. Educate yourself and others. Maybe take some time to learn more about trauma and abuse. So then maybe you can come to understand the dynamics of what really happens, even if you're never a victim. And then share your knowledge somewhere. Instead of going online and getting angry at victims who are talking about their victimization and asking them very rude questions, why don't you advocate for intervention programs? Advocate for learning about mental health, taking care of your mental health. Maybe advocate for programs for young people to learn about abuse and how to avoid getting into those dynamics later on in life. You can practice empathy, putting yourself in a victim's shoes. Maybe talk to some victims before you've judged them. Okay? Don't prejudge them. Just listen. Try to understand. Imagine imagine feeling the way that they're describing they felt, aside from the circumstances. Imagine a time when you felt that way and compare the two. Instead of always thinking that you're right, instead of always thinking that you have to prove the point you already think, challenge yourself. Imagine that you are an opponent of yourself right now, and you have to prove what's flawed within your thought process. Challenge your biases. Search for them, find them, figure out what they are, and then try to look at the issue again without using those biases. It'll really help. Reflect on what your reaction to victims is. Do you attack them really cruelly? Does it make you angry? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Does it just make you feel really curious and you just can't wrap your head around it? What is your reaction? And then try to trace why that might be. Where did you come to get those feelings from? What are the assumptions happening that are making you feel that way about victims? Explore them more deeply. Make sure you question stereotypes. It's right along there with the biases. What are you assuming about victims that is making you upset? Think about all the common stereotypes surrounding abuse victims and knock them out. Every person is an individual. Just because someone is a victim doesn't put them automatically into a category with every other victim and make them that exact same stereotype. It's all each an individual person with an individual life, with an individual childhood, with an individual family, individual hopes, dreams, and aspirations that I promise you were not to be with an abuser and to go and gain some sympathy or be a victim. Try to release those stereotypes and see a person for who they are and figure out why it bothers you so in a non-compassionate way that this person is a victim. And even if you're not someone who typically blames victims, just even if you were a victim, maintaining these practices and being somebody that calls out biases and calls out their own biases and recognizes their own stereotypes, because we can all fall into these bad habits. And if you don't work them constantly, then you're going to fall back into it. So keep this on the forefront of your thoughts all the time, in all your conversations and in all of your interactions with people. You should always be keeping that muscle strong, that brain muscle, that thought muscle, all of it. Anytime you see victim blaming, speak out against it. Okay, I don't know how much of a voice you have, if you like doing that type of thing, if it makes you uncomfortable. I have always been the type of person to really be an introvert, not really speak out much. And I've been, for the past few years, really challenging myself to embrace the discomfort. And when I see someone being cruel to another person, I absolutely, with no shame, will step in and speak to that person head on. And I keep it classy. I will say there's times that I haven't all the way kept it classy, but I think it's warranted. Keep it classy as much as you can. Be tactful and just use facts. Kill them with scholarly sources. Yes, ma'am. Yes, please. Just rain those scholarly journals right down on them. The professionals. It's all at your disposal. There's nothing more fulfilling than when you crap all over someone's really crappy opinion with facts. And then, sources to back it up. And then you just watch them say the most ridiculous things to continue to try to disagree with you. But we can't all be Mother Teresa all the time, okay? But when you're feeling up to it and you have the emotional bandwidth to do it and the mental capacity, it's best when you can come at somebody completely free of anger. And when you can come at them just very calm and without the intention to humiliate them. And whatever they say, it doesn't matter, because they're just being defensive, and you just hit each point that they come up with, and you just question it. And you question it in an intentional way where you already know the answer. And then you just lead them into the real answers, and they eventually will come there. And they'll either double down, which I'm going to tell you is going to happen more often, or once in a while, someone will just give it to you. They'll be like,
okay, you got me. Touche, I see what you mean. I take it back.
It really does happen. And it's really, it might not seem like much, but moments like that, you are making a difference in the world. And even if the person doesn't, if you're doing this in a public format, on somewhere like Quora or somewhere like Reddit or on social media, that's what we have nowadays in this time period of socialization. People try to act like it's not the real world, but it's as real as our world is today. A lot of times, that's a lot of our interactions. Those are real people behind those computer screens and those keyboards. So in a place like Reddit, where someone is a victim and they're telling their story and someone's in there bullying them, and you speak against this bully, and you do it respectfully, tactfully, and even if that person does not change their tune, that victim really appreciates that, because it's so embarrassing to put your vulnerability out there and have someone attack you. And in any time you can come to someone's aid that's happening to, I do it all the time. I love it. It's like my favorite thing to do. It's literally, I'm like on Reddit, like trying to save the world right now. So full of myself on there. I'm
Like, I am a superhero on Reddit.
I am. Okay, I am. We don't all have capes, you know? God. Ask about me on Reddit. All right, and just the last few things. You want to support victim advocacy, volunteer or donate to programs, model compassionate behavior. People that are asking for help and support and advice, provide that. And being very encouraging and giving, kindness and love and light. Refrain from gossip and judgment. We're all susceptible to it, and even if you don't like somebody, you should still care if they are being victimized and refrain from jumping on that in their weak time to hurt them, hit them where it hurts. That's just not cute. Be a supporter of mental health awareness. Encourage people to go to therapy, encourage counseling, share your own experiences with that, and make it just a completely destigmatized, normal thing, like going to the doctor, because it really is. Lastly, just practice mindfulness, practice self-awareness. These are all things that without those things, that's where victim blaming runs rampant. That's where biases run rampant. Keep a mindful place. Be grateful for what you have and be cognizant of people that are suffering. And lastly, just be a safe space. Make it known that you offer support to anyone that goes through that you are an advocate. Don't be too pushy. Respect people's privacy, respect people's decisions, respect that they are going to make their own choice. You do not have to convince them that they're a victim and they need to get out of their relationship, and you're not the all-knowing, all-seeing being that just has been through all of this and knows everything, and like they're wrong and you're right and they need to get out. No, just let people live their lives and be supportive and back up if you need to back up. Okay, people, support doesn't look like control. Support doesn't feel pressuring, and it's not for you. It is whatever that person needs. And those are some of the ways that we can help on a day-to-day basis with reducing victimization, holding the correct people accountable, and ending victim blaming. And that might sound like a hefty task ahead. It might feel like you don't make much of a difference, just as one person. But if every single person thought that, no big changes would happen. It really is like a butterfly effect. It starts with one and it ripples through and it gains momentum. Just be one of those ripples. Just be one. And right now, if you can't really help much with the cause because you're stuck in the throes of abuse, you're still in that place where you're still being victimized at this time, my heart goes out to you. Know that you won't feel this way forever. There are links in the description of this video that can help you today, and they won't just pressure you to leave and ask you a bunch of questions that make you feel ashamed. They'll really help you and support you. I believe in you. I know that you wouldn't be in this situation if you had a choice, and you don't deserve to be filled with regret and shame and humiliation and self-hate. You deserve love, and I know that even if it doesn't feel like it right now, I promise you it is in your future. And with that, I will see you next time. I love you.